Hello, I have read 100 books this year. Actually, by the time it's taken me to film this video, I'm actually up to 105, but we're gonna do 100 for this video, and I'm gonna tell you whether or not you should read the book and what my rating was. I'm generally quite a nice rater, and I am very likely to change my rating on these things between now and then. But yeah, this is my 100 books of this year. I would like to preface this by saying last year I think I only read 58, and the year before that I was like around 50. I don't know what happened this year. We've been having a great reading year. I'm still reading a lot. I'm trying to get to 120. I think that's my final goal. I've got 15 more before the end of the year. I would like to say I'm going to keep these very, very short because I have 100 to get through, and if I take a minute for each, this is going to be a very long video. My Goodreads is linked below if you want like any full reviews. I generally full review most of the books I read, or at least like have a couple words for my review. But let's get started. The first book I read was The Ex-Hex. I would really recommend reading this during October. I did read it during January, but you know, get in the Halloween vibes. I gave this book 4 stars. You should definitely read it. The next book I read was Ruthless Vows. I read it the day it came out. I finished it in about 4 hours. I gave it 10 stars. Like, I could give it as many stars as I could. It was an amazing book. You should definitely read the series. I then read the graphic novel The Magic Fish. I waited for so long to get this from the library, and it was so worth it. 5 stars. It's amazing. Beach read, I ended up reading on a beach, and it's also my first and only Emily Henry book, and I gave it 4 stars. You should definitely read it. The next book I read was The Secret Lives of Country Gentlemen by KJ Charles. I gave it 4 stars originally. I probably go back and give it like 3.15 stars now. I really do like books that are set in this time. Like, it's set in like the Jane Austen Pride and Prejudice sort of time. I didn't love the characters. I like the setting, and I'm very biased. So read it if you're interested in those things, but if you don't really read that genre, I wouldn't really recommend it. Next, I read Dark Air. For those of you who don't know, Dark Rise is one of my favourite books ever. I literally have my only special edition that I've bought from like a special edition shop is Dark Rise. So when I got my hands on Dark Air, I finished it in a day. I love this series. I love the plot. I love the characters. I love the themes. Read it. Read it, read it, read it, read it, read it, read it. The next thing I read was The Hex Appeal. I don't know why. I was in a very witchy mood in January. I gave the book 4 stars, though in hindsight I'd probably give it 3 stars. It was very big hocus pocus sort of vibes. Also, the main female character, her name's Essie. She's a witch. And the main male character is called Josh, and he's her landlord, and it's so funny. Like, he becomes her new landlord, and it's like, why hasn't she been doing all of these things that she's supposed to do when living here? And like, he tries to get her to do it. The banter's hilarious. Similar thing though, probably read it during Halloween. I don't know why I read it in January. I then read Wildfire. Also, we're still in January, by the way. I read Wildfire. In hindsight, I didn't really like Wildfire. I just read it to read Daydream, which is right there on my shelf. I actually haven't read Daydream. I bought it the day it came out and then never read it. It's on the list of things to read this year, guys. I swear. There's some things I really like about Hannah Grace's writing. There's some things I really don't like about Hannah Grace's writing. If you want like a silly, goofy read, go for it. Also, I found out the other day that like children read Icebreaker. What the hell, guys? Why? It's not a children's book. There is so much spicy scenes in this, and honestly, I always find myself like flicking through spicy scenes. Like, I'm not interested in them whatsoever. So I think like I probably did skip through a lot of this book, but it's a silly, goofy read. The next thing I read was The Do-Over by Lynn Painter. Prior to this, I'd only read Betting on You by Lynn Painter, and The Do-Over is so good. Short, sweet, it gets the job done. Also, I love the theming. Basically, it's like every day she falls asleep and wakes back up again on Valentine's Day, finds out her boyfriend's cheating on her. Like, it's a whole thing. And then one day, it doesn't go back, and you're like, oh my gosh. So yeah. The next 2 I read in January was The Wicked King and The Queen of Nothing. I read The Cruel Prince like mid last year, and it took me so long to get through The Cruel Prince. I don't know what it was. I just wasn't really in the mood for that sort of book at the time, so it took me so long to get through The Cruel Prince. And then I picked up The Wicked King on the 17th and finished The Queen of Nothing on the 18th. So I went bang bang, read both of them in a day. The series is amazing. I read The Stolen Heir not long after, and I bought The Prisoner's Throne the day it came out and then never read it because I'm terrified that she might ruin the series in this one, because I've heard from some people that like The Prisoner's Throne doesn't live up to the hype, so I'm scared, so I haven't read it. Yay! The next book I read was actually my first arc. It was The Absinthe Underground by Jamie Paxton. I love this book. I genuinely would have read it had I not got it as an arc. Like, I had my eye on the book. It's a very good book. I gave it 5 stars. I would have given it 5 stars if it wasn't an arc. I try to keep my arc reviews very, like, non-biased. It's an amazing book. I love sapphic books, so 10 out of 10. The next book I read was The Hunger Games. This one also, I don't know what it is about the first books in the series, but The Hunger Games, how long did it take me to read? It took me 10 days to read The Hunger Games. I don't know what was wrong with me. I had just watched The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and really wanted to read that book, but you have to read The Hunger Games first, and I struggled through The Hunger Games. I was doing summer school at university, so I think that had something to do with it. Like, I was super busy at uni and really stressed out, so I think that made my overall reading of the book just unpleasant. I did end up giving it 5 stars, and as some of you may have seen on my YouTube channel, it took me a couple of months to then read the second and the third book. But yeah, I would totally recommend The Hunger Games, especially at a time like this. The next thing I read was The Daughter of the Pirate King. I love pirate theming books. I love The Isle of the Gods. I love this book. If you love pirate books, read this book. Simple as that. The next thing I read was How the King of Elfham Learned to Hate Stories. Honestly, this was just a quick read. It felt like I was reading a fairy tale. I love the illustrations and things. I was thinking about this. I probably shouldn't say this now. I was reading Spectacular the other night. The illustrations in that book are so good, so good. I love illustrations. They're so fun. Okay, we are now in February. The next one I read was Atalanta. I love Greek retellings. I am such a Percy Jackson girl at heart. I will read any sort of Greek retelling, Norse retelling, Egyptian retelling, any mythological retelling I will read. I loved Atalanta. Atalanta is one of my favorite myths. So to read it again, amazing. I then read Cinderella's Dead, which I gave 2.5 stars. In hindsight, I read it during a blackout. Not like a social media blackout, but like there was no electricity. It was very scary. I then reread it later and I gave it 5 stars. So it was just the mood at the time in January when we had no power. Cinderella is great. It has very good commentary on what is going on politically in the world right now. So if you're interested in something like that, I would highly recommend reading it. Now we get to when I read The Stolen Heir. I loved The Stolen Heir. I love Holly Black's writing. I don't know why I haven't read The Prisoner's Throne. I will read it, hopefully, before the end of this year. I'm probably going to do a video where I try and get through my physical TBR because it's kind of got out of hand. Next I read Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I had to read it. You know, when I found out I think her books are really Wattpad-y. So when I found out that she was doing a werewolf vampire, I was like, oh, what in the Wattpad? I have to read this. I gave it 4 stars. I generally give her book 4 stars, so I'm not too surprised. I think there's things I love about her writing, there's things I don't like about her writing, but she always gets me back at the end. Next I read Legends and Lattes. I gave it 4 stars at the time. I give it 6 stars now. I reread it. It's amazing. If you haven't read it, go read it. Next, I read Demon in the Wood. Demon in the Wood, again, is very similar to how the King of Elfham learned to hate stories. It's just a light, short read. It kind of feels like a fairy tale, and I love illustrations. Next, I read an arc called Be the Sea. This actually took me a month to get through. It was a really long book, and while I did like some parts of it, I just felt like it dragged on forever. I did like the consistent ocean theming, Pacific Islander theming, and I did love the actual action scenes. I just felt like the book was really long. Next, I read My Mechanical Romance, which actually took me so long to get into. My Mechanical Romance is so short, but it took me the first, 60% to get into it. Why did it take that long? Why? It was a good book in the end, but I don't understand why it took me that long. We are officially in March, by the way. Next, we have Days at the Murasaki Bookshop. I love this. It took me a day to read it. Short, quick read. I love stories set in bookshops. This is pretty much in the same thing. It's just a book set in a bookshop, and I love those. Next, I read another arc called Sideline Love by Emery Page. Honestly, I gave it 4.5 stars then. I'd probably give it 3.5 stars in hindsight. I love sports romances now, and this was like my decline into sports romances. This is probably the first one I read this year, and then I proceeded to read about 20 afterwards. So, you know, thanks to her for that, but I'm not really a hockey romance girly anymore. I recommend reading it if you like sports romances. It's probably not one of the better ones. It was just good. The next book I read was, I guess I'll talk about all of them at once. I read Caraval, Legendary, and Finale, bang, 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 in about a week and a half, I want to say. I loved the series, and I love Once Upon a Broken Heart as well, which I read next. Caraval was interesting. For me, I always have an issue with Donatella. Donatella was so annoying. I don't know what it is. Is it because she's the younger sister? Is it because she's written to be annoying? I don't know what it is, but she is annoying. I also don't understand the whole thing with Legend. Like, Legend never felt like he actually loved her, and it felt the same when I was reading Spectacular earlier this week. It doesn't feel like Legend actually loves her. Like, it's so hard to like understand their relationship at all. Of course, I did rate Caraval and Legendary 4 stars. I rated Finale 5 stars. I did love the series. I love Scarlett and Julian. I love Legend and Tella separately, but I don't understand their relationship. It doesn't make sense to me. I would like to say I probably spent the entirety of this series being confused. Like, the last 50 pages of Caraval, I do not understand. I don't understand a lot of Legendary, and I kind of understand Finale, and I think that's what's supposed to happen, so it should be okay. Next, I may have read 11 of the Ice Planet Barbarian books within about a week and a half. I have no comment. Next, I read Lights Out by Kayla James. One of my friends was getting into F1 at the time, and she really recommended the F1 romance book. She got it as an ARC, from my understanding. I read it on Kindle Unlimited. It's a good book, but it's not a good F1 book. So I think a lot of the Formula 1 references are very irrelevant or like not realistic. Though I did enjoy the romance part of it, and I have read a few F1 romances since, and I would say that Lights Out is a very good example of an F1 romance. I just didn't really click with it, so I think I'm happy with my 3.5 star rating. Next, I read the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, so Once Upon a Broken Heart, The Ballad of Never After, and A Curse for True Love. I rated Once Upon a Broken Heart 4 stars, A Curse for True Love was 4 stars, and then the second one, The Ballad of Never After, I gave 5 stars. I loved all of them. I finished Once Upon a Broken Heart and went, masterpiece. I finished The Ballad of Never After and was like, what? And then Curse of True Love, I was like, I need more, give me more. I would highly recommend reading the series. I know a lot of people say that you can read Once Upon a Broken Heart before you can read Caraval. I really would recommend reading Caraval first. Even though you might not love it as much as you're going to love Once Upon a Broken Heart, I still think it's really important to get all of the world building. And you miss a lot of that world building, I do think. And then you get a lot more information about specific characters. They also reference Jax, who's the main character in Once Upon a Broken Heart. They mention his time in Caraval. So you kind of do really need to read Caraval first. And it's not a bad read. I don't know why everyone talks about Caraval like it's a bad read. It's just a bit confusing sometimes. The next thing I read was The Daughter of the Siren Queen, which is the second book to Daughter of a Pirate King. I loved it. I 5-starred it. I actually don't remember if I've read the third book. If I haven't, I definitely will be reading it soon. I love the series. I love the pirate theming. I guess I can kind of talk about it because it's in the name of the title, but she's also the daughter of the Siren Queen, so she has siren powers, which is so interesting to see. The next thing I read was Off the Grid by Kay Bromberg. I liked the book. I think I gave it 4 stars. I cannot actually remember anything about the book. I think it took me a couple days to read. If you like F1 romances, you'll probably like it. I'm very much off F1 romances now, but I really liked it at the time. Back on my sports romance genres, you know, this is just, you're seeing the decline now. The next thing I read was Heart Match by Elaine Bellany, I think. I don't know how to say her name. I'm sorry if I've said it wrong. I love this novel. I am not interested in tennis whatsoever. This novel made me want to watch tennis. Who have I become? Why do I want to read tennis? I would say, for the most part, the female main character was genuinely insufferable. for a lot of it. It only takes about 200 pages for her denial of their relationship to actually, stop. It was also kind of weird because she had the same name as me, but I still loved the book, so what can you say? Next thing I read was Powerless and Powerful, mainly because I think the news about Reckless had just dropped and so many of my friends love Powerless, so I was like, I kind of have to read it. I read Powerless, I rated it 4 stars. I read Powerful, I rated it 4.5. I cried reading Powerful, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. It was a sad book, and I knew what was going to happen at the end, was what was going to happen. Basically, if you haven't read it, Powerful exists at the same time as Powerless. It's another character's point of view, and I knew the ending was coming, and it still made me cry. It was really mean. I didn't like it. This next one, they happened at the same time. I had a downfall into sports romance, I had a downfall into mystery. This is the one that started the mystery. It's called Death on the Louisa Tanner by R.L. Graham. I really enjoyed this book, and I've always been really scared to read mysteries because I'm worried. I'm very easily scared, and I was really worried to read the mysteries, but this kind of helped me realize that it's not mysteries I'm scared of, it's thrillers I'm scared of. So I read this one, and then I pretty much read the entirety of Agatha Christie in a month. But, we'll get to that bit in a second. Next thing I read was The Imagination Chamber by Philip Pullman. I love all of Philip Pullman's writings. I love his Darkest Materials and the books that came from that. Probably don't read this if you haven't read those. So his Darkest Materials is the best place to start. So here starts my Agatha Christie sort of rampage. The first one I read was Elephants Can Remember. I literally didn't expect the ending. I really like mysteries where you can't expect the ending, and I didn't, and it was very lovely. I did a reread of Divine Rivals during May because one of my friends was coming and we were annotating each other's books. She annotated her favourite book, which is Better Than the Movies. Okay, cool. And I annotated Divine Rivals. So during this month, I reread Divine Rivals. The next thing I actually read was Surviving to Drive. So while she was here, we bought Surviving to Drive by Gunther Steiner together, and then we read it together. If you haven't read any F1 non-fiction books, I highly recommend reading Gunther Steiner. He is hilarious. It talks about his time when he was the principal for Haas F1 team, and sort of what happened during the Russian invasion and like how they pretty much purged the entire team. It's very interesting to read. The next thing I read, I tried to read a lot of the Agatha Christie books in order. So the next thing I read was The Mysterious Affair at Style. I kind of did expect the ending, so I gave this one a 3 stars. That's kind of how I rated the mysteries. If I expected it, 3 stars. If I didn't, 4 or 5. I then read The Enforcer by Avery Keelan. I didn't love this book. Again, I think this is sort of when I realized I don't really like hockey romances, but I do like sports romances, just not hockey. It always kind of weirds me out how for like a lot of the hockey romances, like she's really petite and small. I don't like that. It kind of creeps me out a lot. So that kind of pushes me off a lot of hockey romances. I also can't really remember why I didn't like this book, but I can't remember why I liked it. So next one I read was Fangirl Down by Tessa Bailey. If you haven't read this, you should read it. This is the sports romance. It's centered around golf, and it made me want to watch golf. What's wrong with me? I also read the second one, The Au Pair Affair, which is a hockey romance, and I loved it. So, it kind of takes away from what I just said, but, anyways. The next one I read was The Murder on the Links, and then I read Poirot Investigates, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, The Big Four, The Mystery of the Blue Train. The Murder on the Orient Express as well. I read all of those sort of bang, 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 bang. I loved a lot of those. I think I can remember my favourite one is probably The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. I really didn't expect that at all. I love an unreliable narrator, and that is an unreliable narrator. It was so good. It was so good. I'd give that one 6 stars. Genuinely. It was so good. The next one I read was My Roommate is a Vampire by Jenna Levin. I was actually crying tears of laughter when I read this book, which is kind of unusual for me, and I'm very excited. Reginald, who is one of the side characters, has a spin-off book, and I'm very excited to read that book. I'm waiting for it from the library, and I don't know, it's something about her writing that really made me love the characters. Now we are in June, when I read both of the second and third book of the Hunger Games. So I read Catching Fire, and then I read Mockingjay. I read them both back to back. It took me about a day to read Catching Fire. I finished Catching Fire at about midday, and I had finished Mockingjay by 9 p.m. that night. Mockingjay literally made me cry at the end. It was beautiful. I still, I can't say it because it's spoilers, but I still don't understand why left. Like, their love triangle, and then he just left, and I'm like, why would he do that? Why? The next thing I read was Murder, She Sold by Riley Ray. I would 100% recommend reading this book. It's a murder mystery. She's a realtor, and she goes back to her hometown because her father hasn't been answering her calls, and she can't use her key to unlock the house for some odd reason. So she climbs in the side window and then gets caught by a police officer because he's like, why are you climbing into the side window? And she's like, oh, it's my dad's house. I just like climbed to my key, or like she didn't have the key or something. And then they go inside and there's a dead body. It's really good. You should read it. You should read it. Next book I read was Anne of Greenville. I really wanted to love this book. I love Anne of Green Gables. I really liked the cover. As you can see, it's literally beautiful. I did give it 2.5 stars. This felt like a retelling, and it was a retelling, but she didn't retell it properly. There was a lot missing, and the character, I really don't like when the character is not like other girls, and she pretty much says, I'm not like other girls, and it kind of gave me the ick, so I got 2.5 stars. Next one I read was Reckless. I gave 5 stars. My review is literally, Lauren Roberts, you've done it again. I loved it. It was really good. I highly recommend reading it. Reckless is probably one of my favorite books of this year, and I would say it was a lot better than Powerless. I think I liked Powerless. I loved Powerful, and I loved Reckless. I do understand a lot of people said that Reckless felt like a filler book. Pretty much not much happens. They just kind of go back and forth between places, and then right at the end you get a bit of action. I didn't mind that. I'm not going to complain. I'm someone who has read War and Peace and really enjoyed it. I don't mind filler books. The next book I read was Bookshop and Bone Dust. Honestly, I probably should have read that this was like a 0 to the first book, but basically this is the second book to Legends and Lattes, but it happens before Legends and Lattes. Had I read that prior, I would have kind of got a better understanding of what was going on, because I did not understand where all of my favorite characters from the first book had gone, but now I get it. I gave it 4 stars. Also, the epilogue. Oh my gosh, it was so good. The next thing I read was Shakespeare's Goddess, the Divine Feminine of the English Stage. I did enjoy this book. It was a non-fiction. I wasn't in a non-fiction mood. I think I gave it 3.5 stars. I do like a good comedic twist on non-fiction stuff, so if you're interested in this specific area of study, I recommend it. Otherwise, it could get a bit boring. The next book I read was The Haven, which is part of the Summer Suspense Mysteries by L.J. Ross. I didn't realize at the time that this was the 4th book. I just saw it on Kindle Unlimited and thought I'd give it a shot. Loved it. I love this whole series. You're about to see how quickly I read 1 to 4. I really recommend reading this series. If you like mystery, if you're thinking of getting into mystery, these books aren't scary. They're just very mysterious. Next book I read was The Vow of Thieves, which is the second book to The Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. I really loved Dance of Thieves. I don't know why it took me so long to read Vow of Thieves. Like, I really don't understand. I love her writing. I love her characters. I love her storylines. It was beautiful. It was genuinely beautiful. I really recommend reading the series. Next, I actually read Better Than Movies, and based on when I finished Driving to Survive by Gunther Steiner, this pretty much tells me it took me a month to read this after I actually got it. It is a rom-com. This is a rom-com. Like, if you could put a rom-com into a book, it would be this book. And you know, I really loved it at the time. I love my friend's annotations, and I think that actually probably made the book better. Had I read it without the annotations, I probably would have given it maybe a 3.5. I did give it a 5 stars. I think there's just something about it. It really did feel like a rom-com movie. It felt like I'd watched it before. Next, I read The Cove, which is the first book in the Summer Suspense Mystery series. Then I read The Creek. I gave The Cove 3.5. The Creek 4.5. If you haven't read The Creek, if you haven't read the series, I highly recommend it. The books literally just kept getting better and better. this is sort of when I started to put my university readings into my Goodreads. So the next book I have is Don's Party. If you're not reading it for uni, don't read it. It really wasn't that good. I think I gave it 4 stars. That's because it was the best of the worst bunch. The next one I read was Throttled by Lauren Asher. I did try to get through this series. I think I only ended up reading 2 of them. I am increasingly becoming annoyed with series which are based off of sports, where the sports elements of it are not very realistic or they're not very relevant to the plot. Like, they're just there in the background. I really like sports romances where you actually get to see the sports. And also trashy fanfic books do always get me at the end. I think I gave it a 3.75 stars. The next book I read, I'm gonna get it out because I have it just here, was The Au Pair Affair. I love this book. I love the cameos in this book. If you haven't read her sports romances, but you've read her romances, I highly recommend reading the sports romances. If you like sports romances, I recommend reading these books. The first one is called Fangirl Down, which I mentioned earlier. The next one I read was The Bay, which is the 3rd book in the Summer Suspense Mystery series. I'm addicted to her writing, and the next time I'm in a mystery kick, I will be returning to her writing. It's so good. I don't know what it is. She builds up the suspense really well. You get very attached to the characters. It's very good. The next one I read was The Children's Bark by Helen Garner. I do recommend reading this book if you are a literature person. I would not recommend it otherwise. Some of the wording is just so confusing, but I had my teacher to explain it, so it wasn't that bad. Next book I read was The Prelude by William Wordsworth. I did end up writing on this for my exam. I thought it was very interesting and very informative. Don't read it if you're not interested in that thing though. Next book I read was The Age of Larkspur by Alicia Park. This is one of my friends who wrote this book, and she is such a good writer. Oh my goodness, had I picked this up in a bookstore, I would have been astounded. It's amazing. I gave it 4 stars. I adored this book. I adored the characters. I adored the whole... the characters are so precious. I just want to hug them. They're so special and here to me. The next book I read was Collided by Lauren Asher. I think these books always get me back in like the last 25%. Like, this book took me over 2 weeks to read, but I finished the last 25% so quickly. It's like, I feel like 50% of the book could be taken out. Like, you don't need this in between bit. Start and just put them together. I don't understand why we have so much filler in these books. I am so proud of this. I got the arc for Vilest Things by Chloe Gong. I love Chloe Gong. She is my favorite author. I cannot explain to you how crazy this was to me. I signed up to the NetGalley thing as a joke, and it was taken seriously, and I got the arc. I gave this book 8 stars, 10 stars. You can have as many stars as you want. I loved it. It was phenomenal. The endings always get me as well. Oh, I love that. I would have bought and read this book on the day it came out had I not got the arc for it. I still haven't bought it yet, but I have all of her other books. I'm just waiting until I have some extra money. I don't have any of that right now, but I actually own the rest of her books. So, you know, I literally almost screamed in my uni class when I got the notification that I got the arc. The next book I read was The Murder on SS Andromeda. I honestly would say I was probably just not in a mystery reading mood when I read this book. I gave it 3 stars. I could have given it more. I do love a good mystery on a boat. I love a good mystery map. I just don't think I was interested in it because I was not interested in the genre anymore. I was more in my romance era by this point. But I did like the book, and I probably would rate it higher had I read it at another time, and I am quite interested in reading the rest of the author's works. The next book I read was A Lyric Poet in the Era of High Capitalism by Charles Baudelaire. Don't read it if you're not doing it for uni. I think I gave it 2.5 stars. This next book is called Pride and Prejudice in Space. I gave it 3 stars. I probably give it a 3.5 stars. I love Pride and Prejudice. I love Pride and Prejudice retellings. I like that the new space element was brought into it, so it's literally Pride and Prejudice set in space. I'm not really surprised that I enjoyed it. I don't actually think it did add much more to the story other than the space stuff though, so I only gave it 3.5 stars. The next book I read was Daughter of Darkness by Catherine Cool and Elizabeth Cool. I love this book. My friend and I have been doing a pseudo book club for the entire last half of this year. We read it for book club. We both loved it. I do have the second book, and I have not read the second book, but I really do plan on reading it. I highly recommend it. The characters are good. I love the plot, and I love the ideas that they're introducing. I liked the sort of group structure as well. She's the only girl on the trip, and Orpheus, Eurydice, yeah. I then read Apprentice to the Villain. Brilliant. Give me 6 more of these. It was amazing. It was amazing. I'll read every book she puts out. It was amazing. The next book I read was Immortal Dark. I really wanted to love this book, and I do think in hindsight I'd probably give it 4 stars. At the time I did give it 3.5. I'd probably give it 4 stars in hindsight. It was really interesting. It's a full person of color black cast. It's vampires. It's based in a university where vampires and humans coexist. There's a lot of murder. There's a lot of blood. I would highly, 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 highly recommend this. I would just say there was a lot of parts where the female main character, whose point of view we see this story through, she doesn't understand things. So then we as the reader don't understand things. She then figures them out, but we don't get told what she figures out. So there are still so many plot points that I think haven't been sewn up properly, though I will be reading the second book. I'm very interested to see where the plot's going. The next book I read was A Tyranny of Petticoats, which is a compilation of stories. I did enjoy it. I'd probably say my favourite was Marissa Myers. I gave it 3.5 stars overall because I thought some of the stories weren't as good as the other ones. But yeah, overall, I quite liked it. The next book I read was The Last Witcher. I didn't actually realise that this is a 0.5. I thought I was reading the first book, so I was very confused why certain things weren't getting explained. I now understand it's a 0.5. I will be reading the first book soon. I think it took me like 2 weeks to read the first 40%, but then I locked in for the last 60. So it did take me a while to get into it. But I would say, had I known about the characters beforehand, I probably would have been more interested. The next book I read was 5 Survive. I read this in 4 hours. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I will be reading A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. What do you mean, Holly Jackson? Holly Jackson, this was crazy. This was crazy. I can't believe you did this. I gave it 6 stars. It was amazing. The next book I read was The Socialite's Guide to Sleuthing and Secrets. I believe I read this at the start of October. It was a very good time to read it. It's a cozy mystery. And I loved the MLM woman group at the start. That was so funny to me. I was intrigued by the plot. I loved the mystery. I loved the main characters of the book as well. I highly recommend. The next book I read was Out on a Limb, 4.5 stars. I don't usually like an accidental pregnancy trope, but it was amazing. I love how it was dealt with. It was so beautiful. I loved this book. If you haven't read it, you really should go read it. The hype is true. The hype is real. Next book I read was The Complete Persepolis by Mary Jane Satrapi. I did read this for university, but I highly recommend reading it outside of schooling and outside of studies. I think the topics that she talks about and the issues that she confronts is so important to today's society and is so important to how we go about our daily lives, and what we are seeing in the world right now. It's so important to read a book like this. The next book I read was A Lady's Lesson in Scandal by Darcy McGuire. Oh my god, guys, this is what I mean by I like books that are set in this time, that are set like in the Jane Austen Pride and Prejudice. I love A Grumpy Sunshine. I adore this book. The characters are so well written. I love the subplots. I love A Marriage of Convenience. Okay, I genuinely thought there was gonna be like a 3rd act breakup, and there wasn't. Like, I read the first line of a sentence and was like, no 3rd act breakup, and then it wasn't a 3rd act breakup. I just can't read. But yeah, I loved it. It was really good. Next one is Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. I can't believe I didn't like this book. I thought I was gonna like this book. I gave this book 2 stars. This is the first Ali Hazelwood book I've ever thought I might need to DNF. Like, it was that bad. I didn't feel any attachment to the characters. I felt like the spicy scenes were just thrown in there, trying to give us like character development within them, and I don't read spicy scenes. I didn't like this book, and I read this with my book club, and we all agreed it's kind of shit. The next book I read was Fangs for Nothing by Stephanie Holmes. Fair warning, this is a very long book. I think it was 600 pages. I gave it 4 stars. It was great. I love vampire books. Basically, the female main character, her job is she cleans up people's homes, specifically people who hoard stuff. He's a vampire who's been hoarding for the past 100 years. It's perfect. The next book I read was Witchcraft, A Graphic History by Lindsay Squire. I love illustrated books. This is one of those. It was beautiful. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. I love how they talk about the witches. I love the colours. I love the characters. I love the writing. It was amazing. It was amazing. I highly recommend it. I finished my reread of War and Peace. This entire semester I was with my university book club and we were reading War and Peace, and I finally managed to finish it. I really do recommend it. It's a long ass book though. What I would recommend when reading War and Peace is basically it's separated into volumes. I would highly recommend reading a volume as one book, putting it down and coming back for the second. That is not how I read it, but I am crazy. I will just read it straight through. I am crazy though. So, you know, take from that what you will. I do recommend reading War and Peace, but it is something that takes a while to read and you have to be interested in something like this. The next book I read was Can't Spell Treason Without T. Basically, it's a sapphic book about a wizard who falls in love with one of the Queen's soldiers and they run away together and they start a bakery bookstore. It's literally everything I could have ever wanted. 6 stars. Amazing. I should probably say now, War and Peace is actually when I hit my 100 books, but I will finish off like speaking about the rest of the books I've read so far this year, but War and Peace was when I hit my 100 books. The next book I read was See You at the Finish Line by Sarah Clement. I read this within a few hours and I was giggling as I read this book. It's so good. I've never read a book centered around running and it made me want to go out and run. Why? I don't like running, but I did want to go out and run. It's embarrassing. Also, all the characters are really fleshed out and relatable in this book and I really enjoy when they're like that. I hate when characters feel like they're just one-dimensional. These characters were like 6-dimensional. The next book I read was Dungeons and Drama by Kirsty Boyce. I'm not gonna lie, I did judge a book by its cover. I picked this up just because of how cute it looked and the fact it's centered around D&D. They do always get me at the end. I probably give this 3.5 stars. I didn't really like the book, I'm not gonna lie, but I did like the ending. The last 50 pages were very good. The last one I read I actually have here. It's called Spectacular. It's the novella for Caraval. So it's based off of Tella, Legends, Julian, and Scarlet. And let me just show you some of these illustrations, guys. Look at that. Where's another good one? I don't want to give away the plot, so we're gonna kind of need to... This one. And the thing is, this book is centered entirely around Tella. Like, it's Donatella's story. And I don't like Donatella, and yet I love this book. I don't know what you did, Stephanie Garber. I don't like Tella, and I like Spectacular. So, hats off to you. So, that was my 105 books of this year so far. I'm trying to get to 120. I don't know if I'm going to make it to 120. Fingers crossed, guys. But yeah, let me know in the comments if you read any of these books, if you're thinking of reading any of these books, or if you have a different opinion from mine. I know I read a lot of my books with rose-colored glasses, so let me know if I've interpreted some of these books wrong. Bye!